So the new mix project, what is this and what do we aim to achieve? Well, the new mix project, this is the planning for the long-term future of the mix master interchange so that a replacement or a major rehab is in place when it reaches the end of its serviceable lifespan. As Anna had mentioned, the ongoing rehab project is looking to extend that lifespan of the interchange and extend it out to the year 2045. And by that time, whether if we go with a rehab or a replacement option, what we're looking to do is modernize the interchange. We want to improve the safety and the functionality of it. We want to improve the function of the local roadway network and the interchange and how they interact. And by doing this, we're going to reduce the congestion on the highways, which will help improve the air quality. Another important feature of this new mix project is we want to align with the city's economic development plans and also the plans that the community has in and around this study area. So if we go to the next slide, why is this project needed? Well, the existing interchange is aging. When it was built, it was innovative for its time, but it's reaching the end of that lifespan. And as time has evolved, safety standards and operational standards have changed also. So what we have now is we have some elements that are a little bit below standard. We have sight lines issues, we have some narrow shoulders, we have tight interchange spacing, and we also have left exits that we're looking to work or eliminate with the new design. We also have the stacked structures out there, which when they have repairs or require maintenance, it can be costly, lengthy, and very disruptive to traffic. Next slide, please. Important thing to remember on this mixed master interchange, what we've found when we were out here with our analysis is that 35% of the traffic on the interchange is local traffic that uses the highway. So it enters and exits within our study area and in effect uses the interchange to get across town. So this adds a lot of traffic to the interchange. Next slide, please. So at the early planning, the Planning and Environmental Linkages, or a PEL study. So next slide. So what is the PEL process or study? Well, this is a Federal Highway Administration has recognized this as an acceptable process for this. And what this allows, it allows the design team to get an early start on technical studies, outreach, and public involvement. And when I say design team, I'm not just meaning engineers. It's not just bridge engineers and highway engineers looking at this. This design team includes planners. It involves urban designers. It involves environmental specialists. It involves public involvement specialists. So it's a true design team that is looking at not only the technical aspects, but also looking at community concerns, environmental concerns, and planning for the future. And what this allows us to do as a design team, allows us to identify key issues and the risks associated with the transportation projects. And eventually the PEL process informs the NEPA process. The NEPA process is the National Environmental Policy Act, and this is the next step in this process where the NEPA process will bring it to a preferred alternative where the PEL study brings it to a reasonable range of alternatives. And we'll get more into that as we go along, but essentially the PEL study is pre-NEPA. So it's like it comes before the NEPA process. Next slide, please. So we need to define our study area, and here is a view of our study area. As you look at this, north is to the top of the page. 84 is running left to right, and we're going from exit 17 to approximately exit 23. Route 8 is running top to bottom on your page, pretty much paralleling the Naugatuck River, and we're going from exit 30 to exit 35. But what's important to note here, and you'll see that the study area encompasses a wider area. We're not just looking at the highways and what is connecting Route 8 and I-84. We're also looking at the major arterials, the intersections in other areas within the city. So anything within the study area is what's being looked at by this design team. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of the Pell process, and there are these 6 steps. I'll walk you through them. And then what we'll be doing after we go through this slide is we'll touch on each one and go through that step in a little more detail. So the first thing we need to identify the transportation needs and deficiencies. What are the existing conditions? And then next step, we determine the purpose of the Pell study and its goal. Then we're going to develop the purpose and need and the goals and objectives for the project. Then we will develop the conceptual alternatives and the evaluation criteria on how we will screen those. Then we're at the step where we're at today, is where we're starting to evaluate and screen these alternatives. And then this will be pushing out a final Pell study report, which we're looking to complete by the end of this year, as it heads into NEPA. So as we head to look at these steps a little bit closer, next slide, please. We're going to look at identifying the needs and deficiencies. And this is defining the problem that's in the area and with the existing interchange. What we've done as a design team is we've gone out, we've looked at, collected a lot of data, done some analysis, especially on the traffic, to project out and model that to see what the traffic conditions will be in the year 2045. And then we've also looked at multimodal, community, and environmental features that could be impacted or that are very important to this area. The next step in this process is defining the purpose of the Pell study and the goal. And this really starts with a vision statement. And I find it important to read this vision statement because it really starts to lay out the groundwork and the charge that this design team had. So the Connecticut DOT desires to establish a vision or master plan for the interchange that addresses and balances the regional importance of the mix master for commuter traffic and motor freight users, while also improving multimodal services, local connections, and livability within the city of Waterbury to enhance and support social equity and economic vitality. So that was the charge that the design team had as we start to develop the purpose and needs and the goals and objectives, which is the next step in this process. So with this, it reads a little bit backwards up at the top level in that the needs are actually the problems that are identified out there, where the purpose is actually the solutions to these problems. And these are transportation related, and these actually line out what are the fatal flaws with the alternatives that are developed. So just to touch on these quickly, what we found are the problems out there. There are structural deficiencies with all of the bridges. We found geometric deficiencies with the highways. We also found that there are traffic deficiencies on the operational side, which can include congestion. Now the solutions, fairly straightforward. With the structural deficiencies, we want to improve those bridge conditions. Geometric deficiencies, we want to improve those roadway conditions. And that's on I-84 and Route 8. With the operational traffic deficiencies, we want to improve that level of service. And this is not only on I-84 and Route 8, but this is also on the associated local roadway network. Now, this is defining the fatal flaws with these alternatives. But one thing that really takes place, and this is the goals and objectives, and this is where it really starts to get more in tune with the city of Waterbury, in that these goals and objectives are what we're looking at as the intended outcomes of this project. And you can notice on the left column on these goals and objectives, it deals a lot more reaching into what is important to the city, what we found out through our public outreach, through our investigations and analysis from the design team. So just a couple examples of what we found is, we want to make sure that we integrate this project with ongoing city projects. We want to support the city revitalizing goals of the central business district. And then also we want to avoid or minimize potential project consequences to the environment. And then on the right side of these goals and objectives, you'll see a little bit more refined of those transportation type goals that were, not the fatal flaw, very broad ones that are up across the top with the purpose and needs, but a little bit more refined where we want to reduce congestion or reduce the crash rates. So then we go on to the next step. Where we want to develop these conceptual alternatives. And as we develop these are called the universe of alternatives. And within this universe of alternatives, these are potential solutions for the long-term future of the Mixmaster. Now, what happens is these alternates are developed by the design team, sometimes as ideas or features that we want to capture. And then there's a conceptual level of engineering performed on these. So with these 24 alternatives, which create our universe of alternatives, we can start to look at them in a little bit more detail. Now, some of these options we could be unstacking the main lines. We could look at potential bypass routes. We can be improving the local roadway network, and there are many other ideas within there. And then we take this universe of alternatives and we start to evaluate them. And we do this on that purpose and needs and the goals and objectives that we developed, but we do it with 3 levels of screening. That first level of screening that we're going to look at is the evaluation of the fatal flaws. And that's those purpose and needs that we had on that top level, the geometric, the structural, and the traffic deficiencies. So if an alternative does not meet those goals of correcting those deficiencies, an alternate will be screened out at level 1. Now, when we get to level 2 and also level 3, we start looking more at those goals and objectives or the intended outcomes that were at the bottom of that chart, where we start looking more at the community and the environmental concerns, as well as refined traffic or highway and structural objectives that we wanted to reach. So again, if something does not meet those goals, it'll get screened out. And then at level 3, we again look at those goals and objectives, but we look at it from instead of just evaluating, we look at the evaluation of the impacts and the mitigation opportunities that can be identified from those goals and objectives. And then if it passes level 3, and it can be, what we're looking at is we're looking to have a range of reasonable alternatives, or what will be the alternatives that will be Pell recommendations for the NEPA process. One thing to keep in mind throughout all of this is that there's public outreach that goes on, similar to this meeting that's going on right now, and that is continuous throughout the process. And we look for this input from agencies, we look for it from the city, we look for it from our PAC committee that we run, we look for it from the public, whether if it's here in this forum or other meetings that we've been to, and from the stakeholders that are out there who could be commenting, on our website also. So then we go to the next step. Boom, and there they go, our range of reasonable alternatives that will advance to the NEPA process. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So as we screen these, and we're going to look just at the level 1 screening process that we've been through to date. These are on a pass-fail basis, and this is looking at fatal flaws of each alternate and seeing if it satisfies the purpose of the project. Next slide, please. And we have identified 24 conceptual alternatives. Of these, 14 of them were fatally flawed, and these were dismissed. 9 of these alternatives advanced past the level 1 screening, and we'll go down to the level 2 screening. And then we also have the no build alternative, which must be retained through the Pell study so that it helps with future evaluations. Next slide, please. So this screen here is showing the 24 alternatives that have been developed. And this slide here is actually showing you, if you go to the website and want to look at these alternatives, this is what that actual page will look like. The alternatives are grouped into those colored column headings across the top, and then it filters down to the alternatives that fall under that grouping. And you are able to click on any of these alternatives and it will pop up and it will show you a graphical representation of what we are looking at, plus a written description of that alternative in what we call a story map type of format. So as this advances through, you can see that we've created the legend here. So those in white are the 9 alternatives that have advanced past level 1, where the other 14 have been screened out. But all of these are still available on the website for you to go and look at. And if there's time, and there's also on the website, there's a very instructive video that can take you through how to view all of these. You know, if you need to look at those and are a little confused on how to get there. So next slide, please. So this here is just refining as we go to those next levels. You'll notice at the top, we have the community and environment and the transportation, which are really the goals and objectives for this project or the intended outcomes. But 2 other criteria that we do need to look at are the cost. You know, we need to make sure that their financial resources are available for this project, and there are phasing opportunities and fundability. And then the other factor that we need to look at is constructability. You know, is this project constructible? Does it provide phasing flexibility? When are we going to minimize the impacts to the commuters and the surrounding community as this is built? So these are the 4 factors that are looked at as we get into these next levels, the level 2 and the level 3, which we are just starting to approach as a design team. Next slide, please. So getting to the construction. This is the process in the anticipated schedule. So this is a broad overview. And if you look at it right now, we're in the Pell study phase where we're looking to identify that range of reasonable alternatives. We're intending to accomplish this by the end of 2023. Then it goes, as we stated, the Pell study is pre-NEPA. So then we will go to the NEPA process, and this will look further at those range of reasonable alternatives and do more analysis on them. And this will bring out a preferred alternative. After that, we'll get into the design and permitting process on that preferred alternative. And then we will start to get into the construction. And that's anticipated to begin in the early 2030s. And we're looking at the completion in the year 2045, when the existing mix master, after the ongoing rehab project, which adds the serviceable life to it, it'll have reached the end. Now with the construction, we're looking at 2 types of projects there, but there's actually 3 total types of projects that we're looking at for this study area. So as we go to this, the first one here are early action projects. And after we describe all 3 of these, I'm going to get a little bit more into those early action projects. But for right now, just want to state that these are standalone improvements to the highway and the local roadway network. They're a little bit smaller in nature, and we'll get into more details on that in a minute. The other 2 types of projects that we're dealing with, and these deal directly with the preferred alternative, are what we are calling near-term projects. And these are improvements to the highways that are approaching the mix master or the core of the interchange. So these are kind of out on the legs. And by completing these projects earlier, we can help with maintaining traffic or other construction concerns when we do get into the core of the interchange on what we're calling the long-term projects. And that is when we get right into the heart of this interchange where Route 8 and I-84 cross, and we have those system ramps that are connecting these 2 main lines. But for right now, want to touch a little bit more on those early action projects. And what these are is these are smaller standalone improvements to the highway and the local roadway network. These are intended to improve traffic flow and safety while the long-term planning for the new mix is ongoing. All of these have been carried out in coordination with the city of Waterbury, and these are independent of the new mix project, and they go through a separate process. And what we're trying to do also with these early action projects, they won't influence the range of reasonable alternatives or the preferred alternative. It's just a smaller standalone project that's looking to give you some earlier improvements in the city of Waterbury. Now, there have been a good number of early action projects that have been identified, and they're progressing, and they're in different states. Some of them are still in the study phase. Some have been reports written on them, and they're being further evaluated. Some have started to reach the design process and are in the preliminary design process right now. And other projects, seeing that they were going to be involved in areas where the rehab project was going to be reconstructing certain areas, such as on northbound Riverside, as that temporary bypass is pulled out. So it was a project that was more efficient to push the design through quicker and get out as a change order to that rehab project, so it could be, so that area could be rebuilt once, and it would be in that form of the improvement that we saw, rather than let the contractor rebuild to what were the existing conditions before he started, and then come back a few years later and make this improvement. So that is just a quick overview of those early action projects. And more information about these will be coming out and will be available in coming months. And some of that will be available on the website. And so now, to give you more information on that website and how to keep involved with this project, I'm going to turn it back over to Anna, who will walk you through that.
Thank you, David. So we anticipate the next public meeting to be held in the spring, April or May. Anticipated in-person and virtual sessions, depending on what's going on at the time. The meeting will cover level 2 and 3 screening results, which will leave us with a range of reasonable alternatives, and it will cover the reasonable alternatives. It will also, of course, get public input and a question and answer session. So we're about to have a Q&A question and answer session, but in the meantime, I wanted to point out that on our website, you can learn more, of course, about the project. You can view many of the reports David mentioned. You can sign up for email updates to be notified of public opinion surveys and public meetings. You can also leave a comment or ask a question 24 hours a day, and if you ask a question, we will respond to you. Not everybody wants to go to a public meeting or necessarily use a computer, so we have many other ways that we can be reached with questions and comments from the public. We have a phone number, 203-805-8018. This will be on our website, the presentation. You can call and leave a comment or ask a question. If you ask a question and would like an answer, please make sure to leave your name and phone number. We have a project email, thenewmixwaterbury@gmail.com. And of course, again, the webpage, newmixwaterbury.com. And there's a lot of information there. If you've missed a public meeting, you can view the meetings there. There's a link to see it on YouTube, and all of the presentations from past public meetings are there as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to John Dean, the New Mix project manager, to open the question and answer session.
Thank you, Anna. So please go ahead and raise your hand, or also put something in the chat if you'd rather, and I can call on you in the order that folks raise your hand, or as the messages come in.
John, one thing I would like to mention, I forgot to mention this within my part of the presentation there, is the analysis that the design team did. All of these are in the document called the Analysis Needs and Deficiency Report, which is a very comprehensive and extensive report. And that's available on the website if anybody wants to look at that and get further details on this project.
Thank you, David. So one thing I will mention while we're waiting for folks to chime in is we will be, one of these early action projects that we've identified is the potential closure of exit 21 on I-84 eastbound. That's going to be moving forward as a separate project under a different state project number, and it will be will have its own public involvement process. So it will have its own public information meetings and other types of outreach to folks in the area. So be on the lookout for those. We'll be sending out notices probably in the spring is when we're going to start our first public info meetings.
John, we
got a question here. Yep. Patrick asks, is there any possibility for an alternate route to the south of the city? Yes, actually, in the universe of alternatives, and we have an alternative called the South City Bypass, and it's looking at potentially taking I-84 roughly in Middlebury is where it would come off and go south down toward Naugatuck, and then tie back into I-84 around exit 23. So it is something that we're looking at. It's going to follow the same screening process as all the other alternatives. And it can be found on the website if you'd like to look at more detail there. One thing that we will examine potentially is that there would be some kind of business route that would take the place of the current I-84 in the city, because there's a lot of demand for access into the city from Route 8 and elsewhere. So that would still be part of the infrastructure there.
John, a question that's come up in a number of the public meetings that we've been to is with all that work that's going on in the Freight Street district, and if any of the alternates would be impacting the Freight Street district there, and that's and how we've always answered that is when we look at the levels of our screening, there are alternates that could move, that have been drawn up, that do move the interchange to the east and do take Route 8 and go through that Freight Street district. And as you look at that level 1, where it's fatal flaws, an alternate that may go up in that area is not fatally flawed, because the interchange and the highways would still operate properly. So it would pass that level 1 of screening. But due to all the goals and objectives that have been developed for this project and through the public outreach, that those alternates have a very hard time getting past that level 2 screening, just due to the fact that there are a lot of goals and objectives that it would not meet. So it would score lower in not meeting those criteria. So that I mean, that's one question we've had come up quite a bit at our community meetings.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. We understand the importance of the Freight Street redevelopment efforts to the city and the economic growth that's expected to come along with that. David, another question for you. Most of the public feedback that we've received so far about the new mix alternatives has been related to highway safety or potential property impacts. This piggybacks a little bit off of what you're saying about Freight Street. Can you comment on whether the alternatives that are advancing past this level 1 screening differ significantly in either of those categories?
Yeah, I mean, when you start laying out these alternates, you have to look at, I mean, everything has to be available and you really have to look at everything. So, I mean, a lot of to start with highway safety, that almost falls into the up near the fatal flaw area. So a lot of those are screened out. So the highway safety is there for all of the alternates and especially for those that are advancing. As far as the right-of-way impacts, you know, we had to look at a lot of alternates, you know, and so we look at different positions of all the roadways. But where we were settling or where a lot of these alternates fell is really to try to avoid the right-of-way impacts. Because again, we've heard from the community how important the tax base is and what's going on in the development in that study area and around the interchange. So we've been very conscientious of that as we've developed these alternatives. I mean, doesn't mean we don't look at something in a different direction and, you know, then understand those impacts and then how it would impact our goals and objectives. But for the most part, we are really trying to minimize as much as possible those rights-of-way impacts.
Are there any other questions or comments that we can answer? Okay, we're getting a couple here. Got John DiCarlo is asking options that could address the fact that the interchange serves as a major local roadway. For example, a primary route of intercity traffic. Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that we found in our traffic analysis is 35% of the trips that were starting somewhere in our study area were using the highway to get somewhere else within the city. So some of the strategies, this is going to be really universal to most of the alternatives, is that we're looking at reconnecting the city grid where possible. If you do get a chance to look at the project website, a lot of those alternatives have what we call frontage roads that would parallel I-84. There are some in existence on Route 8 that parallel Route 8. They would be designed as complete streets, so they're not just designed to get as many cars through as possible. They would take into account other modes of transportation, such as bicycles and pedestrians. But yeah, thank you for that question. That's something that we're looking very closely at and accounting for, and like I said, in a lot of the alternatives.
Yeah. In addition to that, John, we're looking to develop a 5th crossing of the Naugatuck River, pretty much opposite Sunnyside Avenue, is where that comes out, so that to help, you know, really connect in that east-west direction, you know, from Meadow Street over to the Naugatuck River and even further west over to Riverside.
Thank you again, John. Gary leaves a comment here about safety and potentially installing signage approaching the mix master to alerting vehicles to slow down. Yeah, thank you for that. I think just real quickly, since we do have some time, you know, we don't want to take up too much time. We're very cognizant and appreciate your time this evening, but we could do a quick demo of the project alternatives page, and Chris Fagan of our team can show you real quickly how to use it.
Sure, I can do that. Thanks, John. And can you stop your share? All right, so if you go to our newmixwaterbury.com website, you can find the project alternatives that we've been talking about this evening, either through this button that's on our landing page, Explore Project Alternatives, or through this menu that comes down off of project information. Gets you to another button, eventually gets you to the project alternatives site itself, page itself. There are some instructional videos at the top that will teach you in more detail how to use this thing. I'm really just trying to demonstrate some of the functionality that's available and why we created this. The application itself is shown right here in this window. I'm going to try and make this full screen for everybody. Let's see, that's better. The first thing that you'll see is a graphic that's very similar to what we showed today that gives kind of this tree view of the universe of alternatives, all 24 of them. A little bit of a description here. And then really the main part of the page, it can be accessed through these various tabs, which will allow you to navigate to the various alternatives. So for instance, if I pick the category full system interchanges, it'll bring me to another set of tabs that are nested where you can start looking at some of these alternatives. It's click and drag functionality, allows you to zoom in and out and to really see where the infrastructure is being conceptualized relative to the part of the city that matters the most to you individually. It's a big study area. It's, I believe it's close to 2 miles wide. So this was the way that we thought would be most accessible for most people to get their arms around these big, complex interchange concepts, just looking at the pieces that matter to them most. So say, for instance, you live in Town Plot and you're most interested in what's going on down here over in Route 8 by Washington Ave. You could navigate to that area and you could flip through some of the alternatives to see, geez, are one of these doing something that's much different, possibly more impactful or more favorable for me? There's a legend on the right-hand side that shows what all these different lines are. And in the left panel, we have the description and a button where you can provide comments. So this is something that's available 24/7. Hopefully you find it useful if you find your way here. If you provide us comments on the alternatives through this, we're very appreciative. And even if you have ideas or suggestions for how this particular application could be enhanced, that's welcome too. It might be possible. You might have an idea that we could implement fairly easily to make this more user-friendly for everyone. So that's just a brief couple-minute overview of what this tool is without getting into all 24 of the alternatives. So I'm gonna back out of this screen share.
Well, Chris, why don't you hold there for a minute in case somebody has a question on this that you can answer promptly.
Okay, I could do that. Are there any questions? I mean, we appreciate everybody calling into a Tuesday evening meeting to learn more about our project. So I recognize that it's a lot of information for a weeknight.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
All right.
All right, I will give one last call, but you know, as Chris showed you, and as you see our email, or I'm sorry, our email and project information is here, and you can always leave a comment anytime. We do have another question in the chat. The temporary closing of 8 South is dangerous and is making everyone get off 8 North. What is the future goal of that exit?
Are you talking the system ramp from 84 westbound to Route 8 southbound? If that is the question, yes. Yeah, no, that is still under construction. They are replacing the bearings on that bridge, And then also some supports that go on that. So the intent is for that to open back up in the spring. And that is part of the ongoing rehab project that's right now.
Okay, with that, I will close this public meeting. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and please stay tuned for more information.